Okay,
All right,
live,
yeah.
live.
Welcome. We're have a wonderful presentation this evening, and we're going to start the show at around 6:03. We're just going to have a chance, give people a chance to get logged in. We've got about 70 participants, but we had about 360 people registered. So we're going to wait until we have a good number of those online here before we start the presentation.
Sounds good.
Are you seeing my slides?
For those of you just logging in, we're going to take a few minutes to give everyone a chance to get online. We'll start the presentation at 6:03. Got about 174. So I'm watching the ticker. Make sure we get a good share of you online. All right, well, thank you for joining us this evening. I can see people are still logging in, but we'll get started with the introductions, and then we'll start the presentation shortly. Tonight we have a wonderful presentation on Chicago's rich Art Deco history with author Kathleen Skolnik. My name is Scott Fortman. I'm principal of the architecture firm of Gibbons, Fortman and Associates, and president of the Chicago chapter of the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art. The Institute of Classical Architecture and Art is the leading national nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing the practice and appreciation of the classical and vernacular traditions in architecture and the allied arts. This is done primarily through education, publication, and our awards program. The organization is a valued educational resource for students, design professionals, and the public at large. The ICAA's focus is on traditional principles that are universal: proportion, balance, scale, beauty, forms inspired by nature and the human body, incorporating handcrafted materials and art that result in thoughtfully designed spaces that feel comfortable, familiar, and inspirational. The desire for these principles is what draws us together to the ICAA and to events like this. Like many organizations, we shifted last year's programming to an all virtual format. Our ongoing weekly virtual sketching series has been a big hit. Each week we feature a new subject and participants forward a JPEG file of their sketch to the ICAA, and we post the images on social media. I have continued to be amazed at the talent and creativity of the submissions. What people will, I think, during COVID, people have certainly rose to the challenge, and really the creativity is really coming out in some of these sketches that people do in less than a week. In November, we held our 8th annual Acanthus Awards, celebrating the best in contemporary classical and traditional design in Chicago. If you haven't seen it, you can all visit our website or go to YouTube and Google the 8th annual Acanthus Awards. We've got a full schedule of programming this winter and spring, including one on February 25th that I'm sure will have everyone thinking of warmer weather when we host a discussion with ICAA member Ben Lenhart of his recently published book, Gardens of the North Shore of Chicago, moderated by acclaimed landscape designer Craig Bergman. Please visit our website at classicistchicago.org for more details on this and future events and the benefits of membership in the ICAA. If you don't remember the web address, just search ICAA Chicago. I'm delighted to co-host tonight's presentation with the Benjamin Marshall Society. This is our second collaboration. The first was a presentation in December on the work of architect Stanley D. Anderson by Paul Bergman. And we will have a third on March 25th as we join Neil Harris as he presents his updated book on Chicago luxury apartments. I'd like to take a moment to introduce Jane Lebeau, president of the Benjamin Marshall Society, who was instrumental in putting together this series. Jane?
Hello, Scott. Thank you for this wonderful introduction. We are indeed so thrilled to be partnering with ICAA. It seems like it's a perfect combination. Classical architecture and Benjamin Marshall, who was indeed a Beaux-Arts, one of the greatest Beaux-Arts architects we know of in the USA, and whose main works were in Chicago, although he did work all across the United States. Just a little quick background on Marshall for many people who still don't know his name. First of all, we founded the society in 2002, and we could barely find his name in any books. It was quite amazing when we started. So it's been quite a pioneering journey. But today, Marshall is coming to the fore. We're so excited. For those of you who don't really know Marshall, he was born in 1874, died in 1944. And in fact, he died at the Drake Hotel, which, by the way, he built and is celebrating the Drake, their 100th year. In fact, it was sadly on New Year's Eve, this past New Year's Eve, where they celebrated the 100 years. And we had hoped to do a big gala there, which we're still hoping to do this year. We'll see what happens. So everyone keep tuned. In the meantime, Benjamin Marshall did pioneer East Lakeshore Drive. He built the first high-rise residence in 1911 on the opposite end of the Drake Hotel, and ended up building 5 out of the 8 buildings. He built the South Shore Cultural Center, used to be the South Shore Country Club. He built the Edgewater Beach Hotel. The Edgewater Beach Apartments are still up. Sadly, the Edgewater Beach Hotel is no longer. But what legends we have. So we have also the great Blackstone Hotel, for which Marshall received the Chicago AIA Award. There's so much to tell about Marshall, and this is not about Marshall tonight. The only thing I'd like to say is that our mission is to make the name, life, works, and legacy of Benjamin Marshall known to the public through education. And part of his legacy was as a maker of Chicago, making Chicago into the destination city that it really has become today. He had a huge hand in that. So under that umbrella, and we continue by saying that we want to revive his dialogue on architecture in an urban and civic environment. Under that umbrella, we can speak about all the other architects and all the other movements, as well as entertainment and the many things that he brought to his hotels that helped make Chicago a destination city. For people interested in the Benjamin Marshall Society, you can go to our website, benjaminmarshallsociety.org. There's a sign up for membership. And there is also, you can go to Facebook and you can write us a message as well on Facebook to tell us if you want to become a member or not. We do have more events coming up and more collaborations with ICAA. We're very excited. Do take a look at our schedule. I won't go through it with you. It is on our website. And with that, Scott, thank you. Thank you so much. You can take it from here.
I'm muted. Thank you, Jane. Now I'd like to take a moment to introduce today's presenter, Kathleen Skolnik. Kathleen Murphy Skolnik teaches art and architectural history at Roosevelt University in Chicago and leads seminars on Art Deco design at the Newberry Library. She's the co-author of the Art Deco murals of Hildreth Meyer and a contributor to the recently published Art Deco Chicago, Designing Modern America. From 2009 to 2016, she was the editor of the Chicago Art Deco Society magazine, and she currently serves on the advisory board of the Art Deco Society of New York. Take it away, Kathleen.
Thank you, Scott. Let me start my screen share. We'll get underway. Thank you to Scott, and thank you to the Benjamin Marshall Society and the Institute for Classical Architecture and Art for inviting me to speak about one of my favorite subjects, Chicago's Art Deco architecture. Tonight, I'm going to be showing you some of Chicago's iconic Art Deco buildings, many of which were featured in the Chicago Art Deco Society publication, Art Deco Chicago, Designing Modern America, which was published in 2018. But we're also going to be looking at some less well-known buildings that illustrate the tremendous diversity in the expression of Art Deco and its wide applications to a variety of building types in the city. But before we start our virtual tour, I wanted to pose this question. What is Art Deco? It's not an easy question to answer. There's no clear, simple, precise definition of Art Deco, at least not one that I'm aware of. Alistair Duncan, one of the foremost experts on this subject, has compared defining Art Deco to the response made by the late Supreme Court Associate Justice Potter Stewart when he was asked for his definition of pornography. Stewart replied, "I know it when I see it." And I agree with Duncan that this is true for Art Deco as well. I doubt that many of you would have any trouble identifying the Empire State Building or the Chicago Board of Trade as Art Deco, even if you didn't know exactly why you characterized it that way. One of the best ways of recognizing Art Deco is through its most common characteristics. And I've listed some of them here, although you won't find all of these features in every single Art Deco building. Art Deco buildings can differ widely from one another. A number of prominent scholars have argued against defining Art Deco as a style. For example, in a 1983 essay in the Art Deco Society of New York News, the noted architectural historian Richard Guy Wilson offered this advice. If we can use the term Art Deco not to designate a specific style, but in the sense that it is inclusive and connotes the tremendous fertility of ideas, culture, and design, beginning in the early 20th century and reaching a peak in the 1920s and 1930s, we will better serve our purpose. Wilson regards Art Deco more as an umbrella term that reflects the spirit of its time, rather than a style with specific visual characteristics. Jared Goss, a New York City art historian and a former curator of 20th century decorative art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, wrote this in his 2014 book, French Art Deco, which is essentially a catalog of the Met's French Art Deco collection. Art Deco is commonly referred to as a style, a designation that suggests specific shared characteristics. The diversity of expression, however, precludes conceptual unity. More accurate, perhaps, would be movement or idiom, both of which connote a general philosophy or point of view. Wilson and Goss and many others argue against considering Art Deco as a style because they recognize that a style implies some cohesiveness. And in the case of Art Deco, the time period, the aesthetic principles, the visual motifs, and everything else that typically defines a style is open to interpretation. Art Deco designers shared a common desire to develop an aesthetic that was appropriate for a fast-paced industrial age. But the way in which this impulse was expressed could vary widely. When I lecture and write about Art Deco, I try to make a conscious effort not to use the word style, although I can't guarantee that over the next hour, I won't slip up and use that word because it's easy to do. But I do think of Art Deco more as a movement, a spirit, an attitude, or an approach to design rather than a style. In a 1997 book that he co-authored, Bevis Hillier, the British author and critic who introduced the term Art Deco in the late 1960s, defined Art Deco as a decorative response to modernity. And I really like that definition. It's simple, It's vague enough to encompass all of the expressions of Art Deco, and at the same time, I think it captures what are two of Art Deco's essential characteristics. It's modern and it has a decorative quality. One of the reasons for the tremendous variety in Art Deco design is the many different and sometimes conflicting movements and artistic styles that contributed to its emergence. I've listed a number of them here. The three most commonly cited are Cubism, Exoticism, and the Ballet Russe, but there were many, many others. Art Deco was like a sponge, and it just soaked up elements of all of these different movements. So let's look at some Chicago Art Deco. I want to start first with the tall commercial Art Deco buildings in Chicago. The Art Deco skyscrapers that began rising on the skyline of Chicago and other American cities in the late 1920s can often be traced to a decorative arts exposition held in Paris in 1925, the International Exposition of Modern Decorative and Industrial Arts. And here is the main entrance to that exposition. It was called the Gate of Honor. And here's an exposition poster. And you can see from the poster that the French term for decorative arts is art décoratif. And that's where the term Art Deco comes from. Here on the upper left is a wrought iron screen entitled L'Oasis by the French master of metalwork, Edgar Brandt, that was on display at the exposition. The side panels are covered with large stylized flowers, and in the center is a fountain motif. Below that is a glass fountain sculpture designed by René Lalique for the French perfume pavilion at the exposition. And on the right, an actual fountain, the luminous fountain, also designed by Lalique for the exposition grounds. And here you see that fountain motif again in the metalwork above the entrance to the Chicago Motor Club, which was opened in 1928. So the ornamentation on these buildings is often derived from that Paris exposition. But the form or shape of these Art Deco buildings, that stepped back profile, so associated with Art Deco, and illustrated here in this postcard image of the Palmolive building, did not come from the Paris exposition. There was nothing that looked like this on the exposition grounds. Rather, this stepped back configuration is the result of zoning ordinances regulating building height that began to be enacted in the second decade of the 20th century. By this time, continued advances in metal framing and fireproofing and elevator technology, which had all been pioneered in the 19th century, were resulting in taller and taller buildings. And there was concern that these monolithic structures rising straight up from the sidewalk would block light and air from entering the street and adjacent buildings. And in order to prevent this, these zoning ordinances regulating building height were passed. The first one went into effect in New York in 1916, and Chicago's was approved in 1923. And it was largely based on the one in New York. The Chicago ordinance divided the city into 5 districts. They were called volume districts in Chicago, and a maximum allowable height was established for each one. In the 5th volume district, which covered Chicago's downtown area, the maximum allowable height was 264 feet. However, if a portion of the building were stepped back from the lot line, that maximum height could be exceeded. In a 5th volume district, for each 1 foot that a building was set back, 10 feet could be added to its height. And it was provisions like this that accounted for that Art Deco profile, so typical of Art Deco architecture. But complying with that ordinance was not an issue for the designers of what the Chicago Tribune called the first Art Moderne building in Chicago. Art Moderne was one of the terms used at the time to refer to what we now call Art Deco. And that was the Chicago Motor Club, designed by Holabird and Root, a Chicago-based firm that designed many of Chicago's Art Deco skyscrapers. The 15-story building has a height of 260 feet, 4 feet lower than would have been allowed under the zoning ordinance, even without setbacks. But despite its modest height, the verticality of the building is emphasized by the continuous piers. The piers are the vertical elements of the body, of the vertical elements of the building. And these piers rise uninterrupted all the way to the top of the building, where there is no cornice to stop your eye. The verticality is further emphasized by the narrow width of the building. It's less than 50 feet wide. And at the same time, the verticality is softened by this gently curved bay that begins just above the entrance and rises almost to the top of the building. We saw some of this ornamentation before, the frozen fountain motif and the cast iron panels over the doorway. There are some birds in some of the spandrels and some stylized floral motifs. The Chicago Motor Club has one of the most beautiful Art Deco lobbies in Chicago. The club's touring bureau was originally in the lobby, and you can see the tour desk over on the right. Signage directed members to the appropriate location, depending on what area of the country they wanted to visit. And that signage, along with the original sconces, are still there. This is some silver gilded plasterwork in the lobby. The original floor was terrazzo, and it had a rectangular pattern, but later it was covered with white tiles. During the restoration of the lobby about 5 or 6 years ago, when the building was converted to a Hampton Inn, a portion of that floor was uncovered and restored. You can see a little bit of it over here on the left. The light fixtures are original. Some of them were found in storage, and you can see 2 of them hanging in the mezzanine balconies on the left and a detail on the right. They're made up of frosted glass discs topped with light bulbs. And smaller versions hung in the alcoves, as you see in the historic photo on the left and the contemporary photo on the right. The showpiece of the lobby is a mural painted by John Warner Norton above the elevator doors. It's a stylized map of the United States indicating the 19 major automobile routes in the country in 1928. They're indicated by these light gray lines. And here's a key identifying them. Principal cities are identified by orange rectangles, and national parks by blue rectangles with wavy or zigzag lines. And today there's a 1928 Ford Model A in one of the balconies overlooking the lobby. Most of Chicago's Art Deco skyscrapers are clad in conservative gray limestone, but the carbide and carbon building adds a splash of color to the skyline. It's clad in dark green terracotta tiles with gold terracotta accents, and the pinnacle is covered with gold leaf. It was designed by the Burnham brothers, the sons of Daniel Burnham, and according to popular legend, the color scheme and form were based on a green glass champagne bottle with gold foil around its neck that either the client or the architect saw at a holiday party. Although the form also resembles the dry cell battery that was invented by the principal tenant, the Union Carbide and Carbon Company. The base is clad in polished black granite with black marble surrounding the entrance. And the entrance is topped with Art Deco grillwork that includes a double C pattern for carbide and carbon. And the Art Deco details continue in the lobby in the grillwork above and between the doors, in this balustrade, the elevator doors, which also have a double C design, the moldings, and the light fixtures. For me, the Palmolive building, with its 6 progressive cliff-like setbacks, is one of the most handsome and one of the most sculptural Art Deco buildings in Chicago. It's another Halliburton root design. And here, the architects recessed the alternate bays, creating this pleated or accordion-like effect, which is especially prominent with nighttime lighting. The Palmolive building was originally topped with a beacon on a 150-foot mast, and it was supposed to be called the Lindbergh Beacon after Charles Lindbergh. But Lindbergh never acknowledged this honor, and so officially it was known as the Palmolive Beacon. When the Palmolive building was constructed, there were very few tall buildings surrounding it. It's at the north end of Michigan Avenue, shortly before Michigan Avenue turns into Inner Lakeshore Drive. But over the decades, many tall buildings surrounded it, like the John Hancock building, which you see behind it here. And the occupants of the residential units in those buildings complained that the beacon was shining into their homes. So for first, the beacon was shielded, and then it was extinguished. And in the 1990s, it was replaced with a stationary light. In the early 2000s, when the Palmolive building was converted from an office building to a luxury condominium, a new beacon was installed. But this beacon only rotates along the lakefront, so it doesn't shine into anyone's apartment. We're going to leave the North Michigan Avenue area now and head to the financial district on Lasalle Street, where you will find one of Chicago's most recognized Art Deco buildings, the Chicago Board of Trade, on Jackson at the foot of Lasalle Street. It's another Halliburton root design. And when it was completed in 1930, it was the tallest building in Chicago at 605 feet. That's more than twice the maximum allowable height of 264 feet. And that increased height was made possible by a very innovative configuration of setbacks. The tall tower is deeply recessed from the low entry base, and the 2 shorter side towers are placed perpendicular to it, giving the building an appearance that's been described as a high-backed armchair, with the tower in the rear being the back, the base being the seat, and the 2 side towers being the arms. Here's a band of low relief sculpture above the building's base, and it incorporates some of the commodities that were being traded at the Board of Trade, like corn and wheat. Above the entrance, there are a series of tall, narrow, rectangular windows, and they once marked the location of the 6-story trading floor, which was later divided to make room for an options exchange. And above the windows is a clock with a male figure on either side. The bearded man on the left is wearing a hood and holding some sheaves of wheat. He looks to me like a Mesopotamian farmer. And on the right, there's a Native American figure holding corn, and between them, a stylized eagle. The tower on the Board of Trade has a pyramid-shaped roof, and it's topped with a cast aluminum sculpture of Ceres, the Roman goddess of grain and the harvest, designed by John Storrs. Her gown has vertical folds, which reflect the verticality of the building. In one of her hands, she holds some sheaves of wheat. In the other hand, she has a grain sampling bag. This is the beautiful lobby of the Board of Trade. And I should mention that this gorgeous photo and most of the others that I'm showing tonight were taken by Glenn Rogers, who is a longtime member of the Chicago Art Deco Society. The lobby is decorated with these cascading or waterfall motifs in buff and black marble, and a backlit panel extends the full length of the lobby. Here's another look at those cascades and the lighting. And it's difficult to see, but there are wheat motifs in the balustrades. You can see them a little better in the grille work to either side of the doorway and on the elevator doors. And above the doors, there's a panel with a stylized corn motif. 1 North Lasalle Street is another Art Deco building not far from the Board of Trade that also has a very beautiful lobby with Art Deco grille work and these brackets with stylized eagles holding frosted lamps. This is the elevator lobby. There's a look into one of the elevator cabs. There's brackets again. And you can see some of the chevron designs on the ceiling. The elevator doors with personifications of success and reputation. And an Art Deco letter drop. The classical modern variation of Art Deco was very popular for government buildings in the 1930s and 40s. Classical modern uses elements of classical architecture, but interprets them in a more abstract or modern way. One example of classical modern in Chicago is the former Main post office. When it was completed, it was the largest post office in the world, most likely because Chicago was the mail order capital of the world at that time. It remained Chicago's main post office from the 1930s until the mid-1990s, when the Postal Service moved to a new updated facility. And the old building remained vacant for about 20 years, although many schemes for redevelopment were proposed during that time. In 2009, it was purchased by a British developer at auction. And he proposed a very ambitious development scheme that involved not only the post office, but adjacent buildings and even buildings on the other side of the river, but nothing ever materialized. Then in 2016, the building was acquired by a New York real estate firm who refurbished it, which involved removing asbestos, lead paint, and mold, installing new electrical and mechanical systems, and replacing all of the windows. And they have now converted it to an office complex, and there's space on the lower levels for retail stores and restaurants and spaces for events. Here's another look at the post office. This is the main entrance. And in February of 2020, right before the COVID lockdown, the developer held a party there to highlight the changes that had been made in the building and probably also to attract some tenants. This is what the lobby looked like that night. The marble walls of the lobby have been cleaned. On the upper portion of the walls, there are reliefs against a background of gold mosaic tiles, and they depict various means of transporting the mail, the sailing ship on the left and the Pony Express on the right. And beyond the lobby is this multi-story atrium with lounges. There's a food hall being planned. And this stylized eagle is the new logo for the building. Chicago's Art Deco merchandise mart overlooks the main branch of the Chicago River. When it was completed, it was said to be the largest building in the world in terms of square feet. It covers 2 city blocks and it has about 4 million square feet of space. It housed the wholesale operation of Marshall Field and Company, as well as showrooms for manufacturers of such diverse products as stationery and china and hosiery. Despite the huge footprint of the The main block is has a rather modest height. It's 18 stories with a 7-story tower over the entrance. On the roof, you can see the oxidized copper turrets on top of the tower and the corner bays and 2 other octagonal towers. The entrance to the Merchandise Mart is flanked by the Merchandise Mart logo. And here's a closer look. Here's some of the ornamentation on the tower. These pedestals with the sculptures are in the plaza outside of the Merchandise Mart, and they honor some of the great merchant princes of America. Marshall Field is here, and John Wanamaker, Montgomery Ward, but they weren't from the Deco era. They were added in the 1950s. You find more Art Deco inside the Board of Trade, excuse me, inside the Merchandise Mart, in the elevators, the sconces, the flooring. This is the main lobby. And on the upper wall, there's a 17-panel mural painted by Jules Guerin. Jules Guerin also painted the murals at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. And he also illustrated the 1909 Plan for Chicago of Daniel Burnham and Edward Bennett. The theme of these murals is merchandising throughout the world. They are primarily in shades of rose and cream and brown and green. And some of them are painted against a background of gold leaf squares, which I think you can see in this one. Each one represents a market in a foreign country. Here you have camels laden with Egyptian cotton filing past the pyramids. These are the pottery and silk markets in Japan with Mount Fuji in the background. And here you have slaves picking and loading cotton in Mississippi. This panel has been the subject of some recent controversy. In 2018, some employees who worked in the merchandise building submitted a petition asking for its removal or asking for it to be covered up. But as far as I know, nothing has happened yet. Art Deco residential buildings in Chicago are not as common as commercial buildings, but we do have these two cooperative apartments on Chicago's Gold Coast on Astor Street, designed by the same architect, completed within 1 year of one another. They have the continuous piers and the upper story setbacks that you find on commercial buildings. Ornamentation is rather restrained. They both have fluted spandrels, and there is a linear motif above the base at 2060, and there's a Greek key at 1301. Art Deco single family homes are especially rare in Chicago, but this is a notable example. This is the Russell House. It's also on Astor Street, just a few blocks from those cooperative apartments that we just saw. It's another Holabird and Root design, the architects who designed so many of Chicago's Art Deco skyscrapers. This was a much more modest project. It's a 4-story townhouse. It's clad in limestone that was imported from France. And it has the same elegance and restraint as the Chicago Motor Club. But one difference between this building and the Motor Club is the asymmetrical facade, with this 3-story bay above the entrance. The lead panels separating the windows have a stylized floral motif. And you also find some floral designs on the facade. This one on the left is above the bay, and the one at the center here is between the windows. In the 1950s, the Russell House, like so many of the single-family residences on the Gold Coast, was converted to multiple small apartments. And then in the 1990s, a couple purchased the building and restored it. They created a unit for themselves on the first two levels and converted the third and fourth level into separate condominiums. And the restoration was honored with a Preservation Excellence Award from the Commission on Chicago Landmarks. This is another multi-family building in the Gold Coast. It's on State Parkway, just a little north of Division, and it represents the streamlined modern variation of Art Deco. It was designed by Andrew Lebeau, the Chicago architect, and Edgar Miller, a Chicago artist, and it's called the Frank F. Fisher Jr. Apartments. It's clad in common brick that's been painted white. It's an L-shaped structure, as you can see from this model. Contained 13 apartments that faced a courtyard. This is what the courtyard looks like today. They all had separate entrances. There were 12 two-story units in, and there still are, in the long arm of the L, and a single three-story unit in the short arm. And this was Frank Fisher's own apartment. Frank Fisher, the developer, was an executive with Marshall Fields. A spiral staircase leads to the second level, and it's illuminated with these vertical bands of glass block, which you can also see on the State Parkway facade. These wooden animal sculptures that once topped the entrance into the complex were designed by Edgar Miller. They no longer exist today, but you can still see his terracotta animal plaques on the State Parkway facade. This is another multifamily Art Deco residence, the Politon Apartments, which is in Kenwood on Chicago's south side. Politon is a Native American name, and you see this Native American theme continued in the decoration on the building. In the black terracotta spandrels of the base, which have Native American chiefs wearing feather headdresses. The spandrels on the upper levels are more colorful, and the designs here represent abstract interpretations of Native American motifs like teepees and arrowheads. There are Native American braves in the grillwork at the entrance, and arrows in the light fixtures on either side of the door. This is the oval outer lobby, which is topped with mosaic panels. Some of them continue the Native American theme, as you see in the one on the left, and others have a more international flair, like the one with the Arab woman that you see on the right. And the Art Deco details continue in the inner lobby and in the elevator cabs. Art Deco is fairly rare in church architecture, but I have two examples in Chicago that I want to show you, very different from one another. This is the Madonna della Strada chapel. It's on the Loyola campus. It was designed by Andrew Lebeau, who also designed the Fisher Apartments that we just saw. Madonna della Strada means Our Lady of the Way, and the name comes from an unbuilt extension of Lakeshore Drive that was to pass in front of the church, which faces Lake Michigan. The church is made of reinforced concrete, covered with limestone, and it's a mixture of classicism and Art Deco. It's on a podium or a pedestal, which contains offices and chapels. This is the main facade with the entrance surrounded by rose-colored marble, a modernistic interpretation of a rose window at the top, and surrounding it are Art Deco interpretations of the symbols of the four evangelists. Here is the ox for Luke on the left, and the lion for Mark on the right. The side walls are decorated with fluted pilasters and a frieze with the name of significant Jesuit priests. Loyola was founded by the Jesuits. And the rear wall of the church, there is a large relief of a Latin cross, and on either side, vertical bands of glass block that bring light into the sanctuary. And further light is provided by the glass block between these arched bands of limestone. And this is the other example. This is a very rare streamlined modern church, the first church of Deliverance in the Grand Crossing area on Chicago's south side. The building was originally a one-story hat factory built in 1923. And then in the 1930s, it was given this streamlined modern facade and converted to the church. And some of the features of streamlined modern that you see here are the flat roof and the curved corners and the smooth walls. The building is covered in buff terracotta with green and blue and mauve and black accents. The rounded towers with the glass block infill were added in the 1940s after the church was severely damaged by a fire, and the pastor at the time called them the Old Testament and the New Testament. And glass block later replaced the double hung windows in the rest of the building. The interior is quite colorful with this these lime green walls. This was a color that was selected by the pastor. There are waterfall motifs separating the choir from the sanctuary and the body of the church. And on the ceiling, there's this light fixture in the form of the multicolored cross. This is out from the Deco era. It was added in the 1950s, but I think it's very much in keeping with the spirit of Art Deco. Chicago's Adler Planetarium is an Art Deco design. This was the first public planetarium in the Western Hemisphere. It's located at the northern tip of Northerly Island. It's a 12-sided, 3-tiered structure clad in this beautiful rainbow granite. And at the corners, there are fluted pilasters that are topped with bronze reliefs representing the signs of the zodiac. There's Aries, and Aquarius, and Libra. They were designed by Alfonso Iannelli. And the stars that you see represent the position of the stars in the constellation. This is a small commercial Art Deco building on North Michigan Avenue. And it originally was the home of Jacques' women's clothing store. Jacques Potts, his real first name was Jacob, had established his women's clothing boutique in 1906. For most of the 1920s, it was located on South Michigan Avenue. But in 1928, he moved to this building at 545 North Michigan Avenue. The entrances to the building were surrounded by Art Deco grillwork. And on either side of the main entrance, there are these relief sculptures showing elegantly clad women, which were a perfect advertisement for the merchandise that the customers would find inside. About 8 to 10 years ago, the Art Deco details on the ground level were obscured by these cast concrete panels that don't even match the original limestone. Fortunately, the reliefs are still visible. And the panels are said to be attached with clips that would allow them to be removed without damaging the facade. About sometime over the past 2 years, I gave a lecture on Art Deco architecture in Chicago, and someone in the audience told me that this building was headed for a facade-ectomy. I haven't been able to confirm that. Nothing has happened yet. But supposedly, it was going to be demolished and a larger structure built in its place. But the facade would be saved and restored. Apparently, the original Art Deco details do survive. I shudder when I hear the word facadectomy because I think it seldom works out well in Chicago. But I'm hoping for the best with this building because before it was so altered, it was one of my favorite Art Deco buildings in Chicago. This is a modest 3-story building in Hyde Park on Chicago's south side. It was originally the Ritz 55th garage, and it contained parking spaces for 400 cars on the upper levels with an automobile dealership and some retail stores on the lower level. But what I find most interesting about it is the automobile imagery on the building with these traffic signals and headlights and gear wheels and a roadster with the driver wearing goggles. So this is building is clad in terracotta. The ornamentation is terracotta. Terracotta was in high demand after the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 because of its fire-resistant properties. It was used to fireproof the frames of the new buildings that were under construction, but it was also used for cornices and moldings and decorative accents, and even for cladding. Initially, the colors were limited to brown and buff and red, but in the late 1890s, with the innovation of durable glazes, the number of colors available expanded, and they were broadened even further in the 1920s when further refinements in glazing were made. And this was just in time to celebrate the glamour and exuberance of the Art Deco era. We already saw one polychromatic terracotta clad building in Chicago, the Carbide and Carbon building, but there are many, many more with very colorful terracotta accents. This is an apartment building on Chicago's north side, French-inspired building, with these blue-green relief panels on the lower level with, with faces and floral motifs and birds. Here's a peacock above this window. Here's some geometric ornamentation on the upper floors. And the most exuberant ornamentation is reserved for over the entrance, where you have this abstract design and these soft colors, lilac and coral and pale yellow and blue. It looks a little bit like a frozen fountain design. This is a building on the far north side, originally the Fish Furniture Company, with a blue and white color scheme and covered with marine motifs like shells and fish, and these triangular elements remind me of scales or fishtails. This is the Union Park Hotel. It was originally a residential hotel. Now it's an affordable living complex called the Harvest Commons. And it has a Mayan-inspired entrance surrounded by this beautiful floral terracotta design. And on the upper floor, some wave-like forms and sunbursts. This is Richter's Food Products, a former sausage factory on West Randolph Street, covered with panels with abstract and floral designs in black and orange and blue and white and green. This is the Laramie State Bank, clad in cream and gold and green terracotta. The entrance is framed by colossal columns, decorated with images of industrious workers and cascading coins, rewards for their labors. And on the capitals, squirrels and bees and owls, symbols of thrift and industry and wisdom. And on the side of the building, in the spandrels, stylized eagles perched on globes. Here's the Chicago Bee building, at one time the home of an African-American newspaper. On the ground level, these beautiful floral reliefs in black with a black and gold color scheme. A different palette on the upper levels, this soft green with more floral motifs. So far, I have limited this discussion to buildings that still exist in Chicago. But I want to make an exception and show you one of Chicago's Art Deco treasures that was unfortunately lost in the 1970s. And that was the Michigan Square building with its fabulous Diana Court. It occupied an entire block facing on Michigan Avenue. When the project was announced in the Chicago Tribune in 1928, it promised to be the tallest and the most expensive project on Michigan Avenue. It was going to be constructed in 3 phases, but the Depression intervened, and only the first phase, the 8-story base, was completed. It's a classical modern design by Halliburton and Root, quite restrained. There's not a lot of exterior ornamentation, although the tenants in the building were allowed to design their own shop fronts, and they were encouraged to be very creative. And just going to point out 2 that were located here. And here's a detail. On the left, the Socatch Bakery. The facade was described as red and gray terrazzo, and the Walden Bookshop, which had a white metal facade. Inside the building, at the back, was a sunken court called the Diana Court, topped with 2 levels of upscale shops that were reached by ramps and floating stairs. On the upper portion of the curved rear wall of the court, there were etched and sandblasted glass panels depicting Diana, designed by Edgar Miller. Here are 2 of them. I know they might be a little hard to see. They're glass, and now they're displayed behind glass. On the left, you see Diana with a bow and arrow, and on the right, she has a falcon. These are now in the collection of the Art Institute of Chicago, and they're in the Fragments of Lost Chicago exhibition on the 2nd level. But the focal point of the lobby was the Diana Court, designed by the Swedish sculptor Carl Milles. And here on the left, you can see Diana balancing on top of those vegetal forms growing out of the urn. She's holding her bow, and the water would cascade down into the basin where nymphs and satyrs, like the ones you see on the right, were cavorting. In the 1970s, Michigan Square was demolished to make way for this Marriott Hotel. The architectural critic for the Tribune at the time, Paul Gapp, called the demolition of Michigan Square Chicago's greatest Art Deco loss. Fortunately, the fountain was salvaged, and the fountain is now located outside the Student Union building on the campus of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I'm going to end with some buildings that were originally in Chicago. They're no longer located here, but they still exist. As many of you may know, in 1933, the Century of Progress International Exposition opened in Chicago. This World's Fair showcased Art Deco architecture. Here are 2 examples. On the upper left is the Travel and Transport building, and the Chrysler building on the lower right. As usually happens after World's Fairs, when the Century of Progress closed after the 1934 season, most of the buildings were demolished. But 5 houses from the Home and Industrial Arts exhibit were purchased by a developer who wanted to use them in a publicity campaign for a resort community that he was developing in Beverly Shores, Indiana, which is about an hour away from Chicago. He got most of the houses to Beverly Shores by floating them on barges across Lake Michigan. And he set them up on either side of Lakefront Drive, a road that parallels the shoreline. His resort community was not successful. This was the Depression, and very few people were looking to buy vacation homes. And eventually, he sold the homes from the Century of Progress to private owners. In the 1970s, the area of Beverly Shores, where the houses are located, became part of the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore and the property of the National Park Service. The owners at the time were given various options for compensation, combinations of cash settlements and long-term leases that would allow them to stay in the buildings for up to 25 years. And once those leases expired, the houses were to be demolished. But by the time that started happening, the preservation movement had gained momentum in the United States, and the National Park Service wanted to preserve the houses. They did this through a long-term leasing agreement in collaboration with Indiana Landmarks. The houses are leased to individuals for very small amounts of money, practically nothing, provided they agree to restore the houses. And under this program, 4 of the 5 houses have now been restored. This is, for me, the most deco of them. This is the Florida Tropical House, and you see it at the Century of Progress on the left, and today on the right. It is absolutely stunning. It has some nautical motifs, like the railings on the upper levels, and there are porthole windows facing the lake. This is the Weevil Rostown House, an Art Deco interpretation of the Mediterranean Revival style. The Armco Faro House, which at the time of the fair was clad in porcelain enamel panels, and today it's clad in thin sheets of stainless steel that have been painted white, as you see on the right. This one is not so deco. This is the Cypress log cabin. It was sponsored by the Southern Cypress Manufacturers Association, and it highlighted the various types and uses of cypress wood. One of the most innovative of the houses in the Home and Industrial Arts exhibit was the House of Tomorrow. It was a 12-sided structure with no load-bearing walls. The 2 upper levels were clad completely in glass. The lower level had a garage for the car, as well as a hangar for the airplane, because this was the House of Tomorrow. And of course, in the future, everyone would have their own airplane. The house was initially leased, but the lessee was not following the standards set by the Secretary of the Interior for Historic Restorations, and the lease had to be canceled. Indiana Landmarks has done some preliminary restoration work on the house. They've stabilized it, but they are looking for a new lessee. So if anyone listening tonight is interested, please go to the Indiana Landmarks website and you will find information on how to apply for this lease. So what I have shown you tonight is just a sampling of Chicago's Art Deco buildings. There is a lot of Art Deco architecture in Chicago, but I hope it gives you an idea of the variety of Art Deco and the many different building types that are designed in that style. So thank you again for listening. And Scott, do we have some questions?
Yes. So I've got a few. The Michigan Square building that was on Michigan Avenue. What is that correct?
So Michigan Avenue, Ohio, between Michigan and Rush, and Ohio, and is that Grand next to it? I think Grand.
Okay, and I think someone else had asked what happened to it. I mean, it was demolished. What, just to build the hotel? Is that what, or why was?
Yeah.
Okay. And sort of tying into that, one other question is the Art Deco Society involved in any advocacy? I know there's Landmarks Illinois, which does a great job of watching out for structures that are in danger, but I wasn't sure if the Art Deco Society had any hand in identifying what's in danger.
The Art Deco does have a preservation committee, and the Art Deco Society, along with some other organizations in the city and the state, were instrumental in the kind of saving the Chicago Motor Club building and getting it designated as a landmark. That's what they were involved in, getting the landmark designation for the Chicago Motor Club. So they are involved in preservation advocacy. I have been involved in so many things lately that I'm not quite sure what they are doing right now. And of course, right now, everything's kind of come to a standstill. But yes, they are involved in preservation.
There's another question about if there is a way to, see a number of these projects. Is there any sort of a map or does anyone have sort of a, a walking tour outline of some of the most significant Art Deco structures?
When I was active in the Art Deco Society, I was the editor of the Chicago Art Deco Society magazine. And when I stepped down in 2016, for my last issue, I did a mini guide to Chicago's Art Deco architecture. It's little profiles of the buildings, maybe a paragraph or 2 or 3 about them. It's not comprehensive, but it includes about 70 Art Deco buildings in Chicago, and they're organized by neighborhood. And there are maps, and they're accompanied by photos. 150 photos that were taken, just about all of them, except for maybe 1 or 2 historic photos, all of them taken by Glenn Rogers. And that is available through the Chicago Art Deco Society. They should have back issues that sell, I think, for about $15. So that's a little bit of could use the maps as a walking tour.
Okay. I mean, I know some of these buildings are within, near Michigan Avenue. If you walk down Michigan Avenue, you can see the Palmolive building, you can see, and then not too far away are the 2 residential towers on Astor Street as well. So
on Astor Street. And then the Russell House is not far from that.
Right, right.
And Fisher Apartments up on State.
Right, right. Another question is, are there any Art Deco theaters in Chicago? Did you cover any theaters?
Let's see, right in Chicago. Yes, sometimes it's right in front of you. Well, we had a gorgeous Art Deco theater, a streamlined modern theater, and that was the Esquire on Oak Street.
Oh, yeah.
And if you see any historic images of the building, in the book I mentioned, Chicago Art Deco, Designing Modern America, there are some photos of the Esquire. It was a gorgeous theater. And
I think someone was providing an answer here of the Lyric Opera, which isn't necessarily a theater, but that's certainly.
Yes,
Yeah.
sort of a French-inspired theater. Yes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But the Esquire was just gorgeous.
Yeah, the Esquire is very. It's too bad that it's not really a theater anymore.
Yes, in fact, it aggravates me a little to see the sign, because where are you saving the sign? There's nothing left of it.
Right. And one of the first questions that came across, and I think it's interesting, as more of a comment than a question, but would you sort of liken Art Deco to jazz as far as it's certainly time period and its influences,
the spirit,
right?
I mean, yeah. In fact, Bevis Hillier, who introduced that term Art Deco, he considered several other names for this movement. And one of them was jazz modern, but he said he thought that would be confusing to music lovers, so he decided not to adopt that term.
Okay. And someone asked, what was the name of the building with the peacock window and the abstracted waterfall over the entrance?
Oh, it's just known by its address. It's, I believe, 10 West Elm, and it's just west of State Street. It's across from the where Barnes and Noble was on State Street.
Oh, okay.
So it's off of North State Street. Yeah. It's a building with a mansard.
What was the name of the building?
I think it's just called 10 West Elm. It doesn't have a specific name.
Got it. And as far as the time period, when did Art Deco really explode here in the U.S.?
Oh, it really exploded in the late 20s and into the 30s. But the movements that affected Art Deco started much earlier. And you can find, and in France, there are buildings. Jane told us about a building just recently, and other designs. I mean, Ruhlman was designing furniture in the teens and even before that. So it started earlier, but it really exploded in the United States in the 20s and the 30s and into the 40s too.
Oh, someone also threw in the Pickwick Theater in Park Ridge. That's definitely
Yes, the
Deco.
Pickwick
Yeah.
in, I didn't mention that because it's not in Chicago, but Pickwick is a great example. That's sort of Mesoamerican inspired Deco. It's great.
Okay.
And there are other Art Deco buildings outside of Art Deco theaters outside of Chicago. Some smaller cities.
Right. Someone mentioned the Portage Theater. I don't know that one myself, but and then I think also someone asked about this. I'm not sure if I know what building they're referring to. The Powerhouse that's from Union
the
Station.
one on the river.
Yeah, it's like on the south of downtown,
The
right?
South Branch of the river. Yeah, Art Deco industrial building.
Is that in danger of being destroyed, or is that?
Being destroyed. And to get the latest on that, I would go to the Preservation Chicago website and
Great.
check that out. But yes, it is in danger.
And
It
I'm
seems like
catching.
there's some great use for that building. I'm not sure what, but I wish
Right.
somebody would take it.
Right. A bunch of people posted things in the chat that I didn't really get to. So, but I think we'll just conclude there with the questions and answers. And thanks to everyone for joining us this evening. It was a wonderful turnout. We had over 200 people tuning in online, and I think most of you are still there. So again, what a wonderful night. Jane actually wanted to just show everyone a copy of is it the Brugman book here, Jane.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you, Kathleen. It was just amazing, and Scott and everyone involved. That was a great tour. Art Deco is really one of my most favorite periods in the whole wide world, especially having lived in Paris for 23 years. I want to hold up Bob Brueggemann's book. Here we go. Can you see this? Art Deco Chicago. And I know that you collaborated with him, Kathleen, on this book, right?
Some of the entries.
Yes.
On the buildings I talked about. Some of the buildings I talked about.
Okay, that's my last little addition here. There we go.
Well, great. Thank you, everyone. We had a wonderful evening. Hope everyone learned a little something about Art Deco, and it was great to see all these examples. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Jane. And have a wonderful evening, everyone. Good night.
Thank you again for inviting me. Bye-bye.